Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 5 game from the Vrsar Open. So I was facing Predrag Bodiroga, whom I have faced before. We played in 2021 in the Serbia Open in Belgrade. I had white pieces in that game as well. It was an Alekhine, exchange Alekhine, and I drew up a pawn. So far, up to this game, Vrsar has been going relatively well. I had a win in round 1, then I had 2 draws, and then a win in round 4 against an FM. So I got paired up, having a good tournament. And Mr. Bodiroga is, of course, an incredible player, incredibly experienced, with a vast repertoire, and I actually remember preparing for about 10 hours, because this game was played in the morning and the round 4 finished in the evening the day before or late afternoon. And I prepared a lot that evening. I also prepared in the morning from about 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And about 2 hours before the game, I still didn't know if I would play e4 or d4. Finally, I've decided to go d4. Normally I try to adjust to my opponents and play what I think they are less comfortable with. I played d4 and there were many possible openings. But Mr. Bodiroga opted for the Nimzo-Indian. I mean, I played knight c3. I didn't have to. And against the Nimzo, he plays he plays several things against queen d2. But in this game, he surprised me with a relatively rare move that I actually played myself. d6. And I have one recent game in the Nimzo-Indian played in the Bosniaci Open 2024 as black, where, I usually play this setup where you play d6 and then knight c6 and e5. That's one way to play it. The other way to play it is to play an early c5. But when you play d6, e5 or c5 are coming, and this bishop will be traded for the knight no matter what happens, because it no longer has a way back into the position. So since I play d6, I know what white can do against it. There are 3 possible setups. The most popular one probably is knight f3 and g3, playing a sort of, I don't know, Catalan, Bogo, whatever you want to call it. Then the other thing you can do is you can go a3 and bishop c3, queen c3, knight f3, and so on. And the most active setup is bishop g5, which I played, which I normally play in most Nimzo-Indians when I have the white pieces. But in this particular move order with d6, I think it's very risky to do so. It's fine according to the engine, of course, but after bishop g5, knight bd7, e3, c5, bishop d3, queen a5, I find these positions slightly uncomfortable, because now the bishop's hanging. I don't really have an option to go knight e2, which is what I would like to play. And that means that black has pressure, sort of like they have in the Cambridge Springs. This is the reason I don't go bishop g5. So I played a move, which is fine, which I've been preparing about 2 years ago, but I've been preparing it for the black side, the move bishop d2. And it may seem like a strange move, because we're playing e3. I'm not playing e4, I'm playing e3. And the bishop's going to be shut in for the moment, but I have a way to liberate it later. Mr. Bodiroga played c5, which is the best move. Now, normally you take on c5, but what I did is also fine. It's just as good. So normally dc5, bishop c5, knight f3, but e3 is solid and fine. Black castles, I played knight f3, he played knight bd7, bishop d3. So this is my idea. I just want a flexible setup where I can play for e4 later without any risk. Okay, b6. And now I had a very long thing, because b6 is a strange move. If you think about it, there's a weakness in the black position, the pawn on d6. And I could play normal moves, like castles. But there's a way to transfer my knight to e4, putting pressure on d6, and the other knight could come to b5. And I can do all of that with tempo. So I played the move knight g5, And this, of course, comes with tempo on h7. Black must react. g6 is definitely not a good move, because it creates a hook I can undermine with h4, h5. And since I still haven't committed my king, I could very easily, on g6, just go h4, h5, and castle queenside, and, you know, take on h5 if black takes with the knight, take on h7, and I have a very strong attack. So h6 is forced. And now my knight transfers to e4. Pressure on d6. Now, they could exchange. For example, knight e4, knight e4. I don't know, maybe even bishop e4. I'm not sure what's better. Probably bishop e4. And then, of course, d5 cannot be played. I can still play knight b5. And I think this is fine. Probably rook b8, maybe bishop h7, check, king h8, and so on. But after knight g4, my opponent played the move which I had expected him to play, queen e7. And now knight b5. And the only way to defend that pawn, in my mind, was knight e8, which he did play, after which white has a slight advantage. I thought I was close to having a significant advantage here after knight e8, because I couldn't see the compensation for having a knight on e8. There's actually a way for black to be better here, and this isn't a puzzle position or anything, but I think it's highly instructive, because neither I nor my opponent, who's an IM, played this correctly, and we both invested a lot of time. Now, you would expect that I don't understand it, but he managed to misplay it and was slightly worse instead of being slightly better. So pause the video here and try to figure out what you would do as black. So the best way to handle this as black is to exchange on d2, which I was really... I would have been very happy if this had happened, although I would have been wrong, according to the engine evaluation. So I thought, okay, bishop d2, I'm of course going to take with the queen. But now, instead of knight e8, you go d5. And after d5, white doesn't really have too many options. I would have taken on f6, knight f6, and now cd is the way to, you know, sort of remain equal. And after ed, maybe castles, and c4, and this is a well-known structure you often get in the Panov, with colors reversed though, and it's very hard to play against this pawn majority. Let's say bishop c2, and black's plan, of course, will be a6, b5, b4, and eventually queening this pawn. And normally in the Panov, I have a bishop on g6 because I have it with black, but I would really like to have this bishop on g2. That way I have pressure along the diagonal and on d5, which is the main weakness in the Panov structure. In this case, my bishop is simply misplaced. There are no weaknesses along this diagonal, and I did all of this for nothing. Black's slightly better. That did not happen, though. Instead of that, black played knight e8, which is what I had expected. And now we keep going. I've calculated all of this before playing knight g5, because it's all forced. So knight g5, h6, knight g4, queen e7, knight b5, knight e8. I had assumed that that was the only way to defend. And now just takes on c5. And the point is, if you take with the d pawn, I was going to play bishop takes b4, which the engine says is minus 0.2. So surprisingly slightly better for black, which I find very strange. I'm going to go a3 and get rid of this pawn. My plan is to activate the rook down the a file. But in any case, it's not better for white. If you play knight c5, then I just have bishop b4 winning the bishop. So if you're going to take with the knight, you have to throw in bishop d2. And I can take with the queen or with the knight. Let's say I take with the queen. Now you can play knight c5. And I probably don't trade. Maybe I do trade. I don't know. Knight c5, dc5, castles. And this is now just a symmetrical position where both bishops are relatively bad. And if I castle, my opponent's going to go bishop b7. So I have to go bishop e4. They go bishop b7. We exchange, and it's just complete symmetry. So no one can be better. However, I had been expecting bc, because that keeps a pawn in the center and black has all of these pawns moving forward. But my reasoning was, okay, when this happens, I take on b4, cb4, and I go rook d1. And this now introduces a very strong threat. I want to take on d6. If my opponent doesn't do anything, let's say, a6, which makes no sense, but let's say a6, then white is winning. I just take on d6. Because if takes, queen takes, bishop h7, and white wins. So that's why I played rook d1. I didn't want to castle because this introduces a strong threat. And if d5 is played to get rid of the pawn, d5 just doesn't work. cd, ed, knight g3, and this knight's going to be blockading on d4. The other knight can join in on e2, and this is just a bad IQP. Not that white's winning or anything, but white has a significant advantage, I think, strategically. So the only move after rook d1 is f5. So it just so happened that on move 14, black plays the exact variation I've been expecting when I played knight g5 on move 9. Now, it was relatively forcing, and he played the most obvious responses. But I got exactly what I wanted. And when he played f5, I realized that I'm not better. And that, I don't know if that ever happened to you, but you get exactly what you wanted, but you have misevaluated the position. So the problem is that my knight on b5 can be trapped. And I have to be extremely careful, because a6 traps the knight if the pawn is on e5. So first of all, I have to move my knight. So knight g3. And now if e5 is played straight away, that's no good. I can just take on f5. So that, doesn't work. So after knight g3, my opponent either needs to defend f5, which he did a move or two later, or he cannot play e5, threatening to trap my knight. He played knight c5. And now maybe I should play bishop e2, but I didn't want to waste any more time. My king is still in the center, so I just castled. He played bishop b7, which is fine, developing a piece. And I think I made a mistake here, but I was really anxious to get rid of my weak knight on b5, so I played knight d4. Probably, I think, f3 is the best move. The engine actually says bishop e2, save the bishop, but that never crossed my mind. f3 is equally good. Queen d2 is also a move, but as you're going to see, that's a pattern that I just kept missing. So I played knight d4. He played g6, now e5 is coming, but my knight is no longer hanging on b5, so, it's fine. Now I played bishop e2, more so because I didn't want to worry about g5. I wanted to have a strong light square diagonal and maybe bishop h5 or knight h5 when they're defended. And I also, at this point, didn't want to give up my bishop, because the light squares have been fixed and my knight is on d4, and I was planning to play bishop f3 if needed. e5, okay. And if you turn on the engine here, it says almost -1 for black. And I knew it was slightly uncomfortable. I had no idea it was that uncomfortable. Okay, knight b3, forced. Knight f6. And at this point, I missed a very, very simple way to equalize. I mean, now that I look at this position, it's incredible that it never even crossed my mind. White to play and win material. And it is as simple as that. White just has a double attack. Queen d2. Two pawns are hanging. I don't know what to suggest for black. The engine plays rook a d8, allows queen b4 and says it's equal. Sure, but I'm up a pawn. And black has sort of advanced their pawns on the king side, so not only am I up a pawn, but their position on the king side is relatively unstable. I did not see that. I didn't even think of queen d2. I should have thought, I mean, I knew that d6 was a weakness, but I never considered b4 to be a weakness. It never crossed my mind, which is, of course, wrong. I should have answered Agard's questions, and I would have found queen d2. However, I had a different plan. I wanted to take on c5 and double up my rooks, because I couldn't see what black could do about it. I have an infiltration square on d6, Obviously, when I take on c5, the pawn's going to be on c5. But I still have an infiltration square on d6. So what I did was knight c5, dc5, and rook d2. Better for black, minus 0.7, but I'm doubling up my rooks. And my opponent played rook a8, which is a mistake. The engine says black is better after a5 or h5. h5, I'm not sure about. I don't think I would play that. Of course, the idea is h4, forcing knight h1, but it seems relatively loose. a5 makes more sense to me, but okay. Rook a8 is a human move, rook fd1, and now my opponent took on d2, which surprised me. I was expecting something like bishop c6 now, or maybe a5, I don't know, maybe king g7, but he took on d2. And now I have just claimed the file, and I was really happy here. Here, white cannot be worse, and of course it's equal, because black has a ton of space and more ideas to change the pawn structure, and white just has the d file. So he did play h5. I played queen d6. You have to trade if you don't want to lose a pawn. So my opponent traded, and now my rook has infiltrated. King f7, h4. I want to prevent the pawn from reaching h4, and it's very safe to play h4 now that, you know, the queens have been traded off. King e7, rook d1, knight d7, f3. Finally getting rid of this weakness. And I had another idea here. I could have gone knight f1, but then e4 comes, and when I try to undermine it, my position on the king side crumbles. So I thought f3 was a very important move. f4 and now knight f1. Now if my opponent takes, it's definitely fine. And at this point, he had very little time on the clock, and he really surprised me with e4. And at this point, I was so excited that I'm winning that I almost started shaking. I mean, it's just e4 in my mind was a dreadful blunder. I'd missed a variation a bit later on with which black could have saved material, but the way he played it and the way I'd expected him to play loses material. And it's a very simple piece of calculation. So I take on e4, that has to take back. I take on f4, has to take back. And now I go rook e1, and I'm just threatening to win the bishop. So I'm threatening bishop f3, or, you know, bishop d3. So let's say, random move, a5. Bishop d3, knight f6, saving the bishop, knight d2, and white wins a piece. So the king must move away. The bishop cannot move away because I take on h5. So the king moves, now I go g3. And now the bishop's hanging, rook g4 doesn't work, so the rook moves, and I take on h5. And that's it. That was my reasoning, and I'm just up material, and that's what happened in the game. However, after rook e1, he could have gone bishop f5. I did not see that at all. So, in this position, if I go bishop h5, he goes king f6, and I'm worse. And apparently, the move in this position, if I'm going to save myself, is something like bishop f3, and then he takes on rook h4, or on h4. And of course, that pawn is still hanging. I haven't played h3 yet. But okay, he played the variation I was expecting him to play, and I was up a pawn. And of course, now I'm completely winning. It's just a crushing advantage. And my technique was very good until the very end. So bishop e2 saves my bishop, king f2, bishop f3, takes, and knight d2. And what I want to do is I want to play king e3 and knight e4, forcing, you know, trades and infiltrating with my king. So rook f6 check, king e3. The importance of the knight on d2 is to cover the f3 square. So bishop c6 saves the bishop. And now I could go knight e4 straight away, but that would allow rook f2. So knight e4, bishop e4, king e4, rook f2, and I don't have rook e2. So I have to play rook e2 first. And now I mean, the engine says almost +2. And of course, it's a crushing advantage because I have a better king, I have a passed pawn on the king's side, and I'm about to trade minor pieces by force. And of course, what should black do? I'm just playing g4, h5. At this point, we were both under a minute, or something like that. we get 30 seconds per move, so we may have crossed, you know, over a minute, but we had no... Jesus! There's an extremely large thing flying around my bedroom. I don't know if you heard that. We call them zlatar. They're this big. They make a lot of noise. I don't know the Latin. Come on! Okay, we'll have to live with it. Okay, so rook f1. I'll try to let it out. Come on, go out. Now you may hear sounds of crickets or other wildlife as well. Okay, so I played g4 and my opponent played a4, the only source of counterplay. When this game finished, I set up this position on the board for Vojak, who's a FIDE master, Milan, who's a FIDE master, and Čupić, who's a FIDE master. We were all staying in the same house. White to play and win. Literally everyone said the same move instantly, and I blundered here. So you have a passed pawn, put your rook behind it, rook h2, game over. What do? I'm just playing h5. And if your king crosses over, my king comes over here. So the engine says king e6, best move. Okay, I don't know, h5, gh5, gh5. Now something like rook e1 to gain counterplay, king f4, king f7, or king f7. I don't know, b3 perhaps. a3, now I have to watch out for this, but black isn't in time. And now I can just go rook g2 and here and take. Or of course push my pawn. This is when an outside passed pawn has a rook behind it, not in front of it, it's completely winning. Instead of that, I did something fancy, which in my crazy mind at the time made a lot of sense. I played h5, which makes no sense because then black's rook gets behind the pawn, but I saw that I can go rook d2 and rook d5 and defend the pawn and cut off the king. That makes no sense because I'm leaving the second rank and b2 is undefended. So the game went, of course, gh, gh, rook h1, okay, rook d2, king c6. He cannot go king e6 because after rook d5, the c5 pawn falls and, of course, black does lose. Rook d5, but now rook h2. And at this point I realized that I don't have anything, but moving on, before I played h5, I had expected that I could go here, check, the king moves away, and then I get behind the pawn. But I'm getting in front of the pawn. That's crazy. That's a crazy mistake in visualization. And of course the game is now a draw. Rook g5, rook b2, rook g6, king b7, king d5, and dead draw. Rook a2, king c5, b3, h6, rook h2, king b4. And here we drew, I think, both relieved, and I was incredibly upset at the time because I knew that I had a winning position. Had I had more than a minute on the clock, rook h2 is just... Rook h2 is so obvious that I don't believe that even in time trouble I didn't play it. In any case, in the final position after king b4, there's no way for either side to make progress. If, I don't know, b2 by black, I can just take on a4. It doesn't matter. I can also go to, sorry, rook g1 and then I can take on a4. For example, here takes and just... We're going to end up in a position where either I lose the pawn on c4 or I don't lose the pawn on c4, but it's draw either way. And of course my opponent is an IM, so we just drew here. So I could have beaten an FM and an IM 2 rounds in a row, but I did not because of my poor technique. Also, I was worse, about minus 0.8, in a position in which I thought I was equal. So definitely misevaluated. And, you know, my opponent was in time trouble. He hung the pawn on h5 by playing e4, which was an unreasonable move. I played that part of the game very well, I think. I think I outplayed him in the endgame while we were both low on time, but then when I should have converted, I didn't. So I need to work more on my endgames. I'm going to show you round 6 tomorrow. I played another FM, so tough pairings this tournament, which is good. I would much rather play a strong opponent and lose than play a weaker opponent and win. I honestly think so. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.